Welcome to the Finance Magnates Blockchain Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel McIntosh, and recently we spoke to Samuel Ray, the new CEO of NewsBTC. Established in 2013, NewsBTC is one of the oldest crypto news coverage firms in the business. All right, so if I'm correct, you're the new CEO at NewsBTC.
Yes.
Yeah, how did you get there?
I have. Sorry, let me get my. Okay, so me and Jonathan have a real long history together. We first started working together back in 2012 or 2013 on a website that he ran back then called Forex Minute. We then moved into the crypto space with the purchase of NewsBTC. So the site as it is now, but before the recent acquisition, so before Live Bitcoin News, before Bitcoinists joined the group. Spent a couple of years together developing that website. I was the business development guy there, whilst Jonathan was in the CEO position. Built it from, what do we have when we started? 6,000 or 7,000 users a month to where we are now, so multi-million users per month.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and to be honest, we like to take the credit for it, but we can't take all the credit because obviously we were in the right place at the right time when it started. So the industry literally took off pretty much as we got into it. So yeah, whilst we've managed to build and grow with it, we've also been somewhat lucky in the sense that there's a huge amount of interest that's flown into the space whilst we've been growing. So yeah, and then just to catch up on exactly where I am now, I then took a step back from NewsBTC and worked in an almost ICO consultation position. So I was linking up people in advisory roles at these ICO companies with websites like Jonathan's, so NewsBTC, and a couple of others, so as to sort of provide a referral for advertising partnerships. And then Jonathan came back to me just recently and said that they're growing incredibly fast, maybe an incredible offer, and yeah, so I've taken on the full-time role here as CEO.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm excited about it.
So can you tell us, what is NewsBTC exactly? What are the resources that you provide the crypto community?
Sure. So we are, first and foremost, a media group. So we own now 3 primary brands. There's NewsBTC, which is I would call it a flagship website. Bitcoinist, which is, again, it's a huge website, but one that we've only sort of enveloped into our group within the last 8 months. And then there's Live Bitcoin News, which is slightly smaller, but growing incredibly fast. Our primary offering through these sites is a news and media service to users, and our business model is to fund our ability to create this sort of objective journalism using advertising.
I see. Okay, and so you mentioned that NewsBTC has been part of this fold since, I'm sorry, was it 2015 or was it
2013?
2013
was site inception, and then it up until the end of 2016, early 2017, NewsBTC was just the primary brand through which we published news. But then we introduced Live Bitcoin News into the fray around that time, and then, as I say, over the last 8 months, we've bought Bitcoinist.com, and we now publish through there as well.
Right. So you kind of, as a person who's been in this space for, more than a year, I think there's been so many people who've come in the last year, you kind of have a unique perspective as to how things have changed. So what are the biggest changes that you've noticed in the way that, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are talked about since this began back in 2013?
Well, there's a lot more people talking about them. I think and this is one of the things that sort of sets us apart from, or puts us in a strong position in this space, is that when me and Jonathan first got started in cryptocurrency, it was tiny. You could count the number of, and I put this in inverted commas, well-known people on one hand. as time has progressed, these individuals, many of them have gone on to become almost household names now. So Roger Ver, Charlie Shrem, these sorts of people. And these are people that we did business with and have relationships with right at the very beginning. So it's the fact that we've been able to follow the growth of these people. It puts us in a position whereby we know who is the kind of person that's going to be leading a top ICO company, who's the kind of person that's going to be not misleading investors that are looking to get in on the space. So yeah, but in terms of what you said, how people are talking about crypto, it's gone from an underground payment method for drug dealers on Silk Road to literally hundreds of billions of dollars worth of industry now. So the people that are talking about it are very different in terms of where they sit in society and industry and commerce.
Right, that makes a lot. So were the early days of NewsBTC just like reporting on, websites like Silk Road and
yeah,
really?
Yeah, so
okay.
we were not specifically Silk Road. I mean, we did obviously because at the time there was the trial and the arrest and all that surrounding Silk Road. So it was a sort of a major area of coverage. But I would say that at that time, a lot of it was we were focusing on the technology specifics because, I mean, whilst Bitcoin was and has been around since 2009, it was still in its very early stages then. So things like block size, things like the actual mechanisms behind blockchain, the distributed ledger, all these things were things that even those people at the cutting edge of technology knew very little about. So we were far more of an educational news resource to start with, whereas now we report on the industry side of things.
Okay. So nowadays, how is NewsBTC, there's been along with all these users and investors, there's been a kind of an influx of new news sites, and also, CNBC and Bloomberg and Reuters have all started reporting on cryptocurrency as well. So given,
Sure.
the way that the news industry is changing in crypto, what is NewsBTC doing to set itself apart?
Well, one thing that sets us apart from practically every other outlet is that whilst we've grown incredibly, whilst our user base has grown incredibly, and whilst our team has literally grown from 4 or 5 people to now between 60 and 100 people, we've remained completely self-owned, independent. We don't have any outside investors. This means that we can, and this brings us sort of to what I see as a big problem right now in crypto. There's so much outside influence when it comes to reporting, when it comes to journalism, even some of the bigger media outlets. I mean, we're talking CNBC, Bloomberg. You're never quite sure where stories come from and where it fits into the whole picture. So is it biased? And I don't like to use the word biased, but there's always that potential when you've got outside investors, when you've got people paying for articles, when you've got all that sort of involvement and pressure. Whereas we don't have that. Our journalism team is completely separate from our sales team, our executive team. So we have, just to give you an idea of the structure, we have a team of journalists for each brand. So one for Bitcoinist, one for NewsBTC, one for Live Bitcoin News. Each of these team of journalists is looked after, for want of a better word, by a team of editors that control the output to a degree, but above the editors, that's where any link stops. So we don't obviously we have relationships with companies and our advertising partners in the space, but that has no influence and it doesn't bleed into what we output in terms of journalism. So you don't see that in other companies, or not to the degree that we've managed to keep it separate anyway.
I see. So, kind of on the note of, articles being paid for and, kind of outside figures getting involved in crypto journalism, what kind of, in addition to that, have you noticed any problematic trends within the crypto news coverage space?
Yes. I mean, one thing that I will highlight right off the bat is that one of the biggest problems that we've seen recently was what we call the Bitcoin Cash debacle, whereby we had Roger Ver going on CNBC suggesting that Bitcoin wasn't Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash was Bitcoin.
Right.
This coincided, obviously, with a huge increase in mainstream coverage of the space. And so, while you were getting millions of new people interested in Bitcoin, which, from our perspective, is a good thing, their first exposure to Bitcoin as a concept or as a technology was the so-called Bitcoin Jesus, suggesting that the real Bitcoin is Bitcoin Cash. So, and when you've been in the space for 6 or 7 years talking about Bitcoin, for then somebody to be in a position to then suggest that Bitcoin is not Bitcoin, and in fact it is Bitcoin Cash, to all these new millions of people that are interested in the space, it is frustrating. But there are other examples. I don't like to highlight that one as the only example. But yeah, it's a good one.
Yes. So, also kind of on the similar note, we spoke to Charles Hoskinson recently, who's the founder of Cardano.
Sure.
And during that interview, he said, quote, "The crypto media is not objective and fair. It's quite biased. People pay for articles, and a lot of these editors are 24-year-old kids who have never run a publication before. They have no journalistic training, they have no editorial discretion, and they're not even willing to have a conversation." So do you think that his claims are justified kind of as a whole? And how is NewsBTC, kind of avoiding those kinds of trends? Because I think there is, a lot of validity to what he's saying.
Sure. I think he could have been a little more subtle about it. But yeah, no, he's not wrong, though. And I would say this applies to a good 70-80% of the industry, especially the news, the publication industry in this sector right now, is that it is being run and set up, and the author teams are comprised of young people who have little to no journalistic experience, and because of this are able to, or are susceptible to influence from the editors, who are in turn susceptible to influence from the people who own the companies that they're working for, who are in turn susceptible to influence from people who are paying for the advertisements that go on their websites. So it's, this feeds into what we discussed, whereby it's so easy to pay for an article, get it published through 40 or 50 different crypto websites without having any sort of disclosure in place that article's been paid for. And then you get people reading the articles, taking the word as gospel, even though they should be being made aware that there's a promotional element to it. Mm-hmm. And in taking this as gospel, then resting their views on whatever the cryptocurrency or the company or whatever the article discusses as fact. So, yeah, it's a huge issue. He's not wrong. As I said before, what we've been able to do, because we don't have this sort of outside influences, we've been able to completely separate the sales, the administration side of the company from the journalistic side. And for me, that puts us at the top of the industry. There is no other company that can say that. And people will say that, but when you delve into the ownership, the affiliations, the shareholders, it invalidates their argument. So, yeah, for us, that's what sets us aside, and that's one of the reasons that I joined NewsBTC again to lead the ship, because it was I see us leading the industry in terms of crypto publication and financial publication within the next couple of years.
Right, and as far as the people who are part of NewsBTC, over the past year, and I'm sure as NewsBTC has grown so much in terms of user base, and the crypto space as a whole has grown so much. There's been kind of a scramble for new hires, new talent, new journalists to join, different places. So how, when NewsBTC is hiring somebody to cover crypto, what's that process like, and how do you make sure that who you're hiring is above the rest of the pack?
We have a system in place whereby if we are to hire, or we're looking to hire a new writer, we'll perhaps put an advertisement on the website, we'll contact, or we'll make use of our contacts. Like I said before, we've been in this space for a long time, so we know who to ask to find writers, to find authors, to find editors. But if we're looking for a new writer, as I say, we'll advertise, they'll come to us or we'll go to them. And then it's up to our team of editors to ascertain whether the writer in question is up to scratch. And I mean, going back quickly to one thing that you said before about this industry is filled with 24, and I know these weren't your words, but it's filled with 24-year-old kids who've never run a publication before, who have no journalist experience. That's true to some degree, but the reality is that it's these 20 to 24-year-old kids that are those people that are knowledgeable about this technology. The next generation above them perhaps doesn't have the exposure, doesn't have the understanding of what they're writing about. And so while we might have to compete with others for journalists, for authors, for writers, we don't see, there isn't a preference as to how old these guys have to be. So that sort of gives us an opportunity to say, look, tell us exactly what you know about the space, prove to us that you can take what's happening in this sector, deliver it to a user or a reader in a way that they'll understand and enjoy, and we'll hire you. There's no bias in terms of how old you are, what your experience is, although obviously we prefer people with experience in the space. Mm. But that comes across, and you know as soon as you speak to somebody, if they have a thorough understanding of the technology, the industry, that comes across. And I think that's true of any industry. It's not just about crypto. It's not just about blockchain. You could say that about any industry.
Right. So can you talk to us about, what are the day-to-day challenges of covering something as crazy and as fast-paced as the cryptocurrency industry?
Sure. For one, time zones are incredibly difficult. Whereas, say, we were covering stocks, we could focus on the US session, the European session, the Asian session, and we would have, whilst you obviously need somebody to cover all of those sessions, they have distinct start and finish times. You can set things up so before the bell, after the bell, you can cover it that way. With crypto, there's no bell, there's no starting point, there's no end of the day. So you need literally 24-hour coverage, which requires us to have 3 or 4 teams of editors that run through the 24-hour period, cover each time zone, and in turn, these need to control or look after and provide article topics to the teams of journalists. So yeah, day-to-day timing is a huge logistical issue, and it's something that has only increased in terms of how much of an issue it is as the space has increased in popularity, and as we obviously see more crypto outlets pop up who are looking for news to cover during this period. But in the same vein, because we've managed to build such a team before this industry is grown or in line with this industry now, whilst there are, I would say, 50 new crypto media outlets popping up every day, none of these have the resources that we have in terms of editor control, in terms of journalists. So we're always on a story first, which is tough to keep up, but it's what sets us apart, and it's what's going to help us grow. So it's something we've had to do.
Absolutely. And, with, all these, across countries, across continents, like there's so much happening, so much information. It's literally endless. How does NewsBTC just, decide what's worthy of coverage?
That is 100% in the hands of our editors. We have a team of editors essentially on each continent. So whenever something comes up that they feel is newsworthy, they'll send it across to one of the journalists that feels specialised in that area. They'll liaise then with the journalist to discuss how we should cover it. They'll pick up quotes from the relevant people in the industry. The journalist will put the story together. Then it goes to the editor. The editor feeds it or feeds back on it, and that process goes back and forth as quickly as possible, so we can make sure that we get the story out in time. But yeah, the editors, their role or part of their role is to look for relevant stories relevant to their time zones, and that also rests on the journalists as well. So many of our journalists are incredibly active on social media, so Twitter, Reddit, so they're often the first or one of the handful of first people to see when any development happens. So then as soon as they see that, it gets fed into our journalistic machine, and it then gets processed into a story. So yeah, we have feelers everywhere looking for stories as soon as they come up.
Yes. So you kind of mentioned this earlier with Roger Ver on on CNBC and him saying, Bitcoin Cash is the real Bitcoin, and then there's
Sure.
minutes later there's Bitcoin Cash is up 5% or whatever.
Yeah.
So do you think that what's your opinion on the correlation between the way that coins are covered and their actual value, and if you think that that's something that's actually real, how do you deal with holding that kind of responsibility as a news organization?
Sure. That's good question. So I mean, to answer the first part, I do think that correlation exists. So I think a coin gets more coverage, or an increased amount of coverage is going to rise in value accordingly, or because of that coverage. I don't attribute any real rise in value for many of the alternative crypto coins to anything fundamental, because more often than not, it is just because somebody's writing about them, or somebody with a large following has discussed them somewhere. I think one of the really important things for this space that should, and the wheels are in motion, but the sooner the better, is to get some degree of regulation in place. And people will disagree with me there, because there are sort of the hardline decentralization team in the whole sector that feel that regulation is a bad thing. But I think with many of the crypto coins and the alternative crypto coins, the altcoins, that landscape now is comparable to penny stocks. You get people publishing totally outlandish claims. There's no disclaimer required, whereas obviously in penny stocks you need to, or in any sort of stock market equity environment, you need to disclaim any business relationship, any holding. That is not required now. One way we try and overcome that as an organisation is that we require all of our journalists, who are obviously many of which hold certain cryptocurrencies, certain crypto coins, they disclose their holdings to us. We then disclose them in relevant articles if they're writing about them. Which I think, whilst it's not a perfect solution, it's very much in line with what we would expect someone like the SEC or whoever ends up actually regulating these things. So it's in line with what we would expect that they would expect of us. So whilst we can't be perfect on it, we try to maintain a more prominent stance on it than many others do. And just to, on the same vein, as a final note on that, all our sponsored articles all have a disclaimer on them saying that this article has been sponsored, it's been paid for, do your own research, that sort of thing. All our press releases are getting labelled as press releases. So there's a clear difference between what's promotional on our site and what's pure journalism. And I think as long as we maintain that gap, as long as we can keep that separation, then we're doing everything we can. Obviously, it's then important that the people who are reading the information are able to understand that difference and are able to act on it accordingly.
So can I ask, what does the future hold for NewsBTC in terms of, this next year and the next 5 years? What kinds of things are you looking to add on to the organization? And also, in terms of personnel, are there any internal moves or, things like that on the horizon?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I have been brought in now or over the last however long has been because this company, as a company, and with its acquisitions and with the team expansion, it's grown incredibly fast. And with that growth has come a number of challenges in terms of structure, in terms of organisation, as you mentioned, personnel. One of my real goals right now is to make sure that the structure that underlies this company in terms of how it's managed, how it grows, how it deals with clients, and when I say clients, I mean advertising partners, I need to make sure that all that flows and all that is in line with what the industry would expect of a company that generates the size of revenues that we do. Because right now, whilst we are coping perfectly well with everything we have to deal with, there are challenges, and there are solutions to those challenges that are not too difficult to implement, but they need to be carefully implemented to make sure that it doesn't inhibit the growth rate that we're running at now. So So yeah, we will make some personnel changes. There's a much higher chance that these will be bringing new people in as opposed to internal personnel changes. And I only say that because the staff that we've got right now, the team we've got right now, are all highly specialised at the job that they're doing and incredibly busy doing it. So we can't allocate extra jobs to people for both of those reasons, for a combination of both of those reasons. But yeah, so we're looking for outside hires. We're looking to grow our journalist team. Our main goal is just to keep up with the industry. It's growing incredibly fast, and we've got to make sure that we're in line with that. Otherwise, we'll fall behind.
And kind of given your position as a person who's been in the industry for such a long time, outside of the journalism space, where do you think that the cryptocurrency industry as a whole is headed over the next year?
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I feel that the cryptocurrency element of the wider distributed ledger technology, the wider blockchain technology industry, is, well, it's going to grow. It's not going to grow anywhere near as fast as the blockchain industry is. So now we're seeing the ICO model, the initial coin offering model, essentially revolutionize the way startups make money. So this now has, and obviously it's come with its problems. So once some regulation is in place, it will be much improved. But now everyday individuals, retail investors, have access to exposure to startup companies that previously venture capitalists would only have an exposure to. So I think in terms of capital startup, that's a huge part of industry growth. There are many. I mean, there are almost too many to mention. I feel that if you were to name an existing technology framework, there is a way that replacing that existing legacy framework with blockchain technology would improve it to such a degree that it's an inevitability. And the way that I discuss this with people who perhaps don't have a huge understanding of how the technology works, I compare it to the internet, and I said that we're at the start. I mean, it's taken 34 years for the internet to get to the point which it's at today, whereby it underpins everything. Mm-hmm. And blockchain started by Bitcoin, but blockchain's 30-year trend started, say, 2010, and so we're 8 years into that 30-year trend. But within those 30 years, and by the end of those 30 years, certainly the blockchain technology will be as widespread and as widely used and as ingrained into global commerce and industry as the internet is now.
Okay. Well, Sam, that's all the questions that I have for right now. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close this interview?
Sure. No, that's all from me.
Ciao.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.